He was U.S. ambassador to the European Union from 2014 to 2017. Antony Gardner, thank you for joining us here on France 24.
Thank you.
Ambassador, I read a piece this week. You're in fact known as the two Tonys. You've known each other, Tony Blinken and yourself, since the age of 5. You both went to Harvard, both went to Columbia Law School. You both have fathers who were themselves ambassadors. I guess you know him better than anyone else, except for the president-elect himself going into this.
He's a remarkable person, really. When I heard about the appointment, I felt the world had become better, honestly. I've worked with him twice during the Clinton years, 2 years, and then during the Obama years. And I've seen him in some pretty difficult, high-pressure situations. You know, he was responsible for leading the interagency effort, for example, after the Russian invasion of Crimea, which was not easy. A lot of big egos around the table, and I never saw him lose his cool. He did it beautifully. I have an enormous regard for him, intellectually and also as a person.
And he's really going to have to hit the ground running, what with so many posts vacant inside of the State Department.
That's right. I mean, it's hard to imagine the scale of what he's facing. So not only just foreign policy, but also rebuilding the State Department that is truly demoralized. Now, it's not the first time that the State Department has been demoralized, but this time is much, much worse. A lot of people left, those who could leave, close to retirement age, and did so. Many young people didn't even want to apply. There are a lot of gaps to be filled. So just in terms of the managerial, challenge, it's enormous. So he's got his hands full for sure.
You're right. There are precedents, and we remember in 2009 when Barack Obama took over, there were many inside the State Department at the time who had been demoralized by the war in Iraq, who felt they'd been overruled by a group of neocons. Is it really that much different this time?
Oh, yeah, it is very different. I mean, if you just make a few calls within the State Department, I think you get the same view. And the reason is the State Department was viewed as the enemy, because most of the people not only have passports, they've lived abroad, and it's true that probably the majority or even the large majority are Democrats. So they were seen as the enemy and starved of funds. And recall that Trump tried several times to really gut the funding of the State Department, which is actually not that large compared to things that we fund across the board, including the military. So, yeah, the people are feeling we are not respected here, and our views are not respected. You had a couple of secretaries of state, from Rex Tillerson to Pompeo, who I think treated people with disdain.
Will you be able to put the genie of isolationism back in the bottle now, especially since we know that on certain points of foreign policy, most notably China, there isn't going to be some break with the Trump administration? Biden's promised to be tough as well.
For sure, but that's a really good question. I think one of the big challenges will be, can we show the American people over the next 4 years that working with allies, working within the rules and the institutions we built after the Second World War yields better results for them than going it alone, unilaterally, bilaterally, transactionally, as Donald Trump did, sometimes insulting allies or undermining Europe and certainly the EU. We have to make that case successfully. In not only 4 years, I would say we need to make it in 2 years before the midterm elections. That's going to be a very tough hill to climb. But look, he's the perfect person to do it.
He's the perfect person to do it. And how does he wade into an argument like the one we witnessed last week between the French president and the German defense minister, Emmanuel Macron, who's still standing by the idea of a European defense force, and the German defense minister who says, well, we just can't do it without the United States?
Well, it depends what you mean by it. And I think there's a lot of disagreement in Europe about the definition of it. If it's really to be sovereign in that, not needing the United States, I think that is something that will not be achieved. If the it is to have greater control over your destiny as a European, be able to conduct some operations without the United States, I think that it is more achievable. In fact, I think it's something that we should support in the United States. Anything that leads Europe to do more, not just spend more, but do more efficiently and wisely, and be more self-sufficient in defense and security is something that we should support, as long as it doesn't undermine it's not duplicative of NATO. So there's this debate in Europe keeps on going.
Keeps on going. You're sitting in Italy right now. As you view the coming months ahead, what would you say the priorities should be for the incoming Secretary of State when it comes to Europe?
It's a long list, but you're right. It's good. We're going to have to be super focused on the doable, on the relatively uncontroversial, on the doable. Look, there are a few things that will happen, I think, pretty quickly in terms of announcements. And then, of course, the hard work will come later. But first is rejoining the Paris Accords for climate. And hence the announcement of John Kerry is so important because no one knows that accord better than him. And then, unwinding some of the damage from the past, which is the unilateral sanctions which were imposed. It was an abuse, I think, of executive authority. Lifting the veto on appointments to the WTO, sitting down with our allies to reform WTO rules because China is the issue. Of all the list I could mention over the next couple of minutes, China will be the issue. We're going to have to show better results, i.e. working with our allies to reform rules that have not been reformed now for almost 20 years. And also the Iran nuclear accord is another one which bears mentioning, and also say that NATO, reaffirm the importance of NATO and the Article 5 mutual defense guarantee. There's a long list, but I would start with those. But the next 2 years, there may not be an enormous amount of bandwidth given the enormity of the domestic challenges. We are a country now that is struggling, I think, in its democracy in the sense that many foundations, pillars have been weakened. This is a president who's had no regard for some of the pillars of American democracy, the media and the judiciary. So foreign policy, while extremely important, is going to take perhaps a second or back seat to the importance of rebuilding domestically.
All right, let's take an example here in Europe. Under Donald Trump, the red carpet was rolled out for Poland's hard right leadership. How do you think Secretary of State Blinken will deal with Warsaw?
Well, I certainly don't want to speak for him, but I can say that a Biden administration almost certainly will rediscover the importance of human rights, of good governance, of anti-corruption, many topics which were hardly uttered by Donald Trump for 4 years, at least until the Chinese disappointed him and didn't give him what he wanted in the Phase 1 trade deal, and then he started talking about human rights. So human rights will be very important, and human rights not just outside of Europe, but also human rights inside Europe. And by the way, a lot of European states and the European Commission itself are raising serious concerns about some activities are going on in a few countries, and you mentioned one, but there are others. Let's remember, it's not just the Hungarians, it's not just the Poles, there are others. And those are legitimate concerns to raise. They will be done, however, I think with the greatest respect. They won't be done in a lecturing manner because, after all, certainly after the past 4 years, the United States, I think, needs to learn humility because we have not been the greatest model for democracies around the world during the past 4 years.
And one final question about democracy in America. I'm looking at Donald Trump's Twitter feed as we speak. His latest tweet, he says the General Services Administration, which, gives out the money for the transition team to the incoming team, quote, does not determine who the next president of the United States will be. What will be the lasting impact of this raucous and transition that we're witnessing?
Well, it's a sad spectacle. There are really two fundamental principles of a democracy. One is the peaceful transition of power, and the other is that every vote counts and every vote should be counted. And it's remarkable to me that so many Americans don't seem to share that view. But I remain optimistic that this is a needed wake-up call. And I say needed because many Americans like me grew up studying about the failures of democracies outside the United States. And we often assume these are things that only happen in underdeveloped countries. Well, guess what? They can happen in the United States as well. And it's important that we remember that. So it's possible that we come out of this crisis rediscovering what's truly important about a democracy and the lesson that every generation has to defend it.
All right, Ambassador Antony Gardner, many thanks for joining us.
Thank you.